In 2019, Hollywood star James Franco came into some pretty serious controversy when several women came out with allegations that the actor had used his celebrity status to coerce them into sexual relationships while they were attending his acting school, Studio 4. James remained silent in the wake of the accusations for 2 years before recently coming out with some shocking statements regarding his sex addiction. Join Trender as James Franco finally breaks his silence and confesses to having sex addiction. In 2019, 5 separate women came out with allegations against Hollywood star James Franco. 4 of these women were students that had been taught by James at his acting class, Studio 4. James founded Studio 4 in 2014, with locations in both New York City and Los Angeles. By 2014, James had already become one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, thanks to roles in films such as 2002's Spider-Man and its 2 immediate sequels. According to James, his founding of Studio 4 was simply meant as a way to give some of his acting experience back to those who needed it most. However, it has since come out that the true reason that James created Studio 4 was to satiate his sex addiction. As the numerous 2019 allegations point out, it seems that James was less interested in teaching students at Studio 4 and more interested in sleeping with them. After these 5 women came out with their allegations, James Franco stepped out of the Hollywood spotlight and chose to remain silent in response. James remained silent for 2 years before just recently breaking this silence with claims that he himself is actually a victim of sex addiction, that is. James recently expressed in a public interview that he felt it was time for him to break his silence after refusing to speak on the matter of the sexual misconduct allegations for 2 years. However, the excuse of sex addiction isn't exactly what many of the star's detractors wanted to hear. The 2019 allegations came along with several lawsuits, and those suits were settled out of court earlier in 2021. James decided to break his 2-year silence only a few months after these settlement payments were made. Allegedly, James paid out well over $2 million to the various accusers who had formed the lawsuits against him. Still, that doesn't mean that the accusers have completely forgiven the formerly esteemed Hollywood celebrity. According to James, his sex addiction can be linked to his past alcoholism, which started when he was only a teenager. James apparently had a somewhat troubled youth and succumbed to full-blown alcoholism during his early teens. At the age of 17, James became sober and has since maintained his sobriety with the help of a sponsor. However, James's successful battle with alcoholism only led to an even greater battle with another addiction, sex addiction. Since James Franco gave up alcoholism in his late teens, the star has apparently struggled to find things to fill the void that alcohol used to fill for him. When James first started making waves in Hollywood, that void was filled with his initial successes. However, by the time that James became one of the biggest names in the industry, getting bigger and bigger roles was no longer enough of a thrill to satiate his addictive personality. It was at this point that the actor turned to sex to fill the eternal void in his soul. James wasn't afraid to talk about his growing sex addiction with his AA sponsor. However, his AA sponsor may not have offered the star the best advice. According to James's AA sponsor, being unfaithful in a committed relationship is an unhealthy behavior, but anything that occurs between 2 consenting adults is okay. This advice from his sponsor was likely well-intentioned, but his sponsor likely didn't factor in just how much James might be abusing his celebrity status to attain said consensual sex. According to James, he used this adage from his AA sponsor to allow his sexual behaviors to spiral out of control. Believing that sex was a positive way to replace the high he used to get from alcohol, James ventured farther and farther into his sex addiction while using his Hollywood clout to find more and more willing partners. It was in 2014 that James finally started up Studio 4, and it proved the perfect avenue for him to find casual sex partners. James apparently had a field day over the next 5 years before receiving the sobering wake-up call of the previously mentioned allegations. As soon as the allegations came out against James Franco, he removed himself from the public spotlight and became silent. Now, James Franco is finally ready to talk about the issues that came up in 2019. He's also spoken up about how the accusations ruined his friendship with longtime creative partner Seth Rogen. If you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to hit the like button to show your support. Also, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to be among the first to know when more awesome Trender videos are on their way. Before their relationship came to an end in the wake of the aforementioned 2019 sexual misconduct allegations, James Franco and Seth Rogen were seemingly best friends. The two had become friends before either became famous, having worked together on the cult classic series Freaks and Geeks in 1999. Though Freaks and Geeks wasn't incredibly successful and only lasted for a season, it ended up being the program that brought James and Seth to the public eye. In addition, it also kicked off the pair's creative relationship with Hollywood filmmaker Judd Apatow, who was the show's executive producer. Of course, Seth Rogen went on to work with Judd Apatow many more times, and Seth also continued working with James Franco quite a bit. After Freaks and Geeks ended, James Franco ended up being the first of the show's main cast members to find success in Hollywood. James's big break came when he was cast in 2002's Spider-Man. The film came at a time when comic book movies weren't quite as ubiquitous as they are now, which meant that studios weren't quite sure whether making them was going to be lucrative. Because of this, the film took a gamble on some relatively unknown stars, including James Franco in the role of Harry Osborn. James Franco was ecstatic upon receiving the role of Harry Osborn, and the high of his accomplishment certainly helped him forget his teen troubles with alcoholism for the time being. Spider-Man ended up being an unprecedented success, and a sequel was immediately put into production. James was cast to reprise his role in the sequel, and he was given even more of a notable presence in the movie. Meanwhile, he was being cast in other films and found himself attaining the status of a teen heartthrob. By the time 2007's Spider-Man 3 came around, James Franco was arguably the biggest star involved in the film's production. He had exceeded co-stars Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst in terms of celebrity status. Spider-Man 3 didn't perform quite as successfully as the prior two, meaning that James's days performing in the comic book movie franchise were over. However, he had built up enough Hollywood cred that he no longer cared. As James was achieving the status of a household name thanks to his role as Harry Osborn in the original trilogy of the Spider-Man films, Seth Rogen was similarly finding breakout success thanks to his roles in Judd Apatow's increasingly successful feature films. After years of being a television producer, Judd Apatow wrote and directed his first Hollywood feature with The 40-Year-Old Virgin, which proved a massive hit and featured Seth in a supporting role. Judd Apatow's follow-up feature to The 40-Year-Old Virgin featured Seth in a starring role. Titled Knocked Up, the feature cast Seth as an unlikely love interest to a woman played by television actress Katherine Heigl. In addition to his success on the screen, Seth was also finding success behind the scenes thanks to his role writing Superbad. While James and Seth had achieved celebrity status with separate projects, they never forgot their shared origin and remained great friends. In 2008, the two starred together in the film Pineapple Express. Years later, they starred together in the controversial satire The Interview, which Seth Rogen also co-directed alongside collaborator Evan Goldberg. The Interview came out in 2014, the same year that James Franco started Studio 4. 5 years later, James's celebrity status was dealt a massive blow with the aforementioned sexual misconduct allegations. When James refused to speak up and answer for his behaviors, journalists were forced to turn to his co-workers to figure out what exactly the actor was like in real life. It was at this point that Seth Rogen was asked to respond to the allegations that had been lobbed against James Franco, and Seth didn't have very supportive words to share about his supposed friend. Understandably, Seth wanted to distance himself from his longtime friend in the wake of the sexual misconduct allegations. Seth claimed that he was no longer interested in working with James, and that the revelation of the allegations had effectively ended the pair's friendship of more than 2 decades. Now that James has finally broken silence 2 years after the allegations were made public, he has shared that he has no hard feelings about the way that Seth Rogen reacted when asked to respond to the news. While it appears as if James Franco is open to the idea of turning his life around and trying to put an end to his rampant sex addiction, some of his accusers have expressed that they aren't willing to forgive him until he shows that he's really changed. Now, it's time to hear from you. Did you know that James Franco recently spoke up about the numerous sexual misconduct allegations that were brought against him in 2019, or did you think that the star was still remaining silent about the matter? As always, like this video to show your support, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you'd like to be among the first to know when more awesome Trender videos are on their way.